Welcome to another edition of The Equity Equation, a program designed to increase understanding and awareness of issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am James Wilburn Jr., and I'm here with my wife, Dr. Roberta Wilburn. We are the co-founders of Wilburn and Associates, LLC, champions of diversity and social justice. Today, we will be discussing the issues of stereotypes. Doc, what are stereotypes?
Stereotypes are basically generalizations. They're generalizations about what we think about people and how we view different groups.
Well, how are stereotypes formed?
Well, stereotypes are formed. A lot of people think that stereotypes in and of themselves are bad, but they really aren't. Stereotypes really are how the brain categorizes information. The brain is very much like a computer. And a computer, it likes to store things in files. And so our brain also likes to store information. And so when the brain gets certain information, it stores it by categories. And a good example of how stereotypes are formed is when we think about a baby. And in psychology, we have a term that's called schema. And schema is kind of the concept that we make, or the mental picture that we make about something. So when a baby sees a small child, sees something that is furry, has 2 ears, a cold nose, 4 legs, and has a tail, they'll say, kitty cat. That's a kitty cat. Okay? And so the brain has categorized now that when they see something like that, it's a kitty cat. Okay, so the little child may have this kitty cat in their home. They go to visit a relative and they see another animal that has 2 ears, furry, 4 legs, a cold nose, and a tail, and they automatically say what?
It's a kitty cat.
It's a kitty cat, but it happens to be a dog. Because that's how the brain has categorized the information.
Kind of like a 6'8", 6'9" African American, and you ask them, what team did you play for? Yeah, because you assume.
Right, that because they're tall and they play basketball. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of a stereotype. So a stereotype would be assuming that every African American male that's tall would play basketball. Our nephew had that problem because he was very, very, very tall. And so when he went to high school, the first thing I went with him, and everyone was saying, do you play ball? Do you play basketball? Do you play basketball? And because of some things that have happened to him, even though he likes to play basketball, he doesn't like to play it competitively.
Right.
And so it's really important that we look past the stereotypes. We look past those mental pictures and realize that stereotypes are not bad, but they are incomplete pictures. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that we get the complete picture or the whole story. So I meet you and I think you may play basketball. Then instead of assuming that you play basketball or categorizing you,
how about asking?
Yeah. Do you like to play basketball? Is that something that you do? Right. So that's what we want to do. We want to find out a person's story because everyone's different regardless of the generalizations we may have about a particular cultural group.
Well, are all stereotypes bad?
No, they aren't. There are actually some positive stereotypes. An example would be that all Asians are good in math and science. That's not necessarily true.
No.
I met a Asian woman, and she said that when she was in high school, she struggled in math, but she never got the help she needed because people assumed that she was lazy or wasn't trying hard enough, because they assumed that because she was Asian, math should have come easy for her, and it didn't. So there can be some positive stereotypes, but a positive stereotype can turn into a negative stereotype if we are putting that stereotype on an individual and that stereotype does not meet or match their identity.
Right, and that's happening in our public schools now when our children begin, let's say kindergarten or first grade, and they get labeled, because they're slow starters.
Right.
And so that label follows them down through the grades, up through the grades, but being a slow starter doesn't mean you're a slow finisher.
That is very true. That is very
and
true.
so, I kind of question it when, I run into a student who's a BI student, or, because that happened to him in kindergarten or first grade, that there had to be some behavior interventions, or, a student was slow academically starting out, and so he was in a special program.
Right.
There
There are some children who definitely are mislabeled.
Yeah.
And that particularly happens to individuals and students of color. It happens a lot. But there are children who definitely do. The labels are appropriate and necessary for them to get the right intervention. But we do have to be careful about labels.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. What do we need to remember about stereotypes when we're tempted to let them determine our judgment about a person?
We need to remember that a stereotype is an incomplete picture, and that we need to get the full picture before making judgment. And so, even though in my mind, when I see you or I see someone else, I may start to make an assumption, I'm going to put aside my judgment and wait to try to get to know the person.
Right.
And then see, does what the person shares with me match with what I know?
Right.
And sometimes there may be certain characteristics that match, and some characteristics that don't match. And so I always need to remember that stereotypes are incomplete, and not to jump to conclusions based on a stereotype.
Right. Doc, what is the equity equation quote for today?
The quote for today is from Albert Einstein. And it says, you can't solve a problem on the same level that it was created. You have to rise above it to the next level. So think about that one.
Yep. You're right. Thanks for joining us for the equity equation. Remember, it takes you and I to make the equity equation work for us all. Have a good one.
Thank you.